I was a woman dying from a terminal illness. But to the man I loved, I was nothing. Even when I was alone in a hospital bed, begging for help, he was too busy fooling around with someone else. Julia Lopez suddenly realized why Jason Smith ate so much when he got home. It was cheap and filling. The vendor saw tears rolling down Julia Lopez's face and probably guessed what was going on. In this big city, the vendor had seen many struggling young couples. So, the next time Jason Smith came back, the vendor made him an extra stuffed jianbing guozi, saying business was good that night, and he was closing early, so he made the last one for his regular. Jason Smith handed it to Julia Lopez, smiling ear to ear. Her eyes reddened, and she only ate a third before saying she was full. She was genuinely fulfilled to the brim with love. In truth, she didn't feel hungry at all. She just wanted him to eat more. At that moment, Julia Lopez finally understood what "love makes water taste sweet" really meant. "Then save the rest for breakfast tomorrow?" Jason Smith said. In the morning, they had noodles that Jason Smith cooked lightly seasoned, almost bland. Even the single egg in the pot was for Julia Lopez. Jason Smith didn't like eggs. Julia Lopez threw herself into his arms, sobbing. This fool. That fool clearly didn't understand why his girlfriend was suddenly laughing and crying, fumbling to comfort her. Speaking of it now, Julia Lopez's eyes dimmed. I've never had another jianbing guozi that tasted that good since. Just then, the owner brought over a tray full of skewers, the spicy aroma wafting in the air. Julia Lopez picked the spiciest-looking grilled squid and buried her face in it. She needed bold flavors to cover the bitterness in her heart. After that, Julia Lopez, the pampered daughter who'd never lifted a finger in the kitchen, began learning to cook for Jason Smith. At first, her cooking was a total disaster, but Jason Smith ate every bite like it was a delicacies if he had no sense of taste. Back then, the money for a jianbing guozi could buy enough ingredients for Julia Lopez to make a meat and veggie dinner for two. As their financial situation improved, so did Julia Lopez's skills. She made elaborate meals every night, always cooking Jason Smith's favorites, and in the mornings, she'd pack a warm lunch for him to take to work. Then what? The food in the thermos started coming back untouched. Jason Smith said he didn't need lunch anymore. Not long after, he started coming home later and later. Julia Lopez would sit by the table, reheating dishes again and again until they lost all flavor. Jason Smith said he had too many business dinners and told her to eat without him. Julia Lopez grew bored and depressed. She wanted to get a job, he said no. She wanted a Peeth, said no. She wanted a baby, still no. His reasons always sounded good, and Julia Lopez tried to convince herself he was the exception. But she overlooked the truth some people can share hardship, but not success. She kept playing ostrich, refusing to believe he had changed, wanting to prove to her parents in heaven that she had made the right choice. Julia Lopez had always followed Jason Smith either beside him or just behind him. Until one day, Julia Lopez finally walked in front of Jason Smith. Wiping her tears, she muttered, "It's just the spice." It wasn't for Jason Smith. She was genuinely overwhelmed by the heat. Tony Kamel listened as Julia Lopez recounted her jianbing guozi story, silently sipping his beer. He had never experienced such a pure, youthful love. Listening to it felt warm, full of mutual giving, irreplaceable. Though time had worn it down, changed its shape, at least in that moment, it had been sincere and beautiful. I've actually never been in a relationship, Tony Kamel admitted, putting down his can. Maybe my personality just isn't suited for sweet words. Jian, will you teach me how to love? Tell me what kind of love you like, romantic, passionate, simple. I'll try them all. I just want to make you happy. He had never thought much of it before, but now he felt a little embarrassed. Sure enough, Julia Lopez's surprised look said it all. You're so handsome. Have a good job. And we're probably a top student in school, right? Even if you're a bit introverted, I bet lots of girls used to chase after you. Didn't you ever like anyone? Tony Kamel had been complimented by girls before, but this was the first time it made his heart blossom. Hearing that from you makes me really happy. Jian, sweet talk is just honest words, isn't it? Seeing Tony Camel's eager expression, Julia Lopez's face twitched. Yes and no. She suddenly remembered a classmate of hers who once got confessed to in front of a crowd. The guy had said, "Even though you're not pretty, I still like you." The girl had exploded, yelling, "Look at your own damn face before judging me! Get lost!" That epic failure turned into a legendary joke that spread across campus. Tony Camel burst out laughing. Looks like even honesty depends on timing. Sometimes, you've got to say the opposite. Julia Lopez's eyes glazed over for a moment. She couldn't help but remember when she and Jason Smith used to laugh together like this. Back then, she never would have imagined that one day, the man who once looked at her with love would look at her with disgust. The hand that once held hers would strike her face for another woman. Julia Lopez shook her head, trying to scatter the sadness, then looked at Tony Camel and smiled. This scene was faithfully captured and sent to Jason Smith's phone. He saw Julia Lopez pause at a Jianbing stall, then walk over to a nearby barbecue stand. Lately, Jason Smith often thought about the postal, those beautiful memories still vivid in his mind, untouched by time. How could he have thought all of that was buried under the daily grind? Truth was, he'd been blinded by success and lost sight of what truly mattered. Jason Smith closed his eyes in regret. If only he had known. Without Julia Lopez, no matter how high he stood, it meant nothing. A person without someone to hold on to is hollow inside. Julia Lopez was his anchor, his cure. Without Julia Lopez, Jason Smith had fallen ill with something no medicine could treat. His house was full of Julia Lopez's traces, but she herself was gone. Jason Smith never thought one day he'd have to resort to hiring someone to secretly photograph her just to see her face. Was this pathetic? 9 years together and he hadn't learned how to cherish her. No, what was all this suffering for? Julia Lopez couldn't see it, and even if she could, Jason Smith was too ashamed to let her. Every time he came to this home, it was torment, a reminder of the unforgivable mistake he made losing Julia Lopez. And yet, he couldn't stay away. He poured a glass of red wine and added 2 sleeping pills only, then could he fall asleep. After the transplant, Tony Camel remained extremely anxious about Julia Lopez's condition. He watched over her like she was his own heartbeat, because he knew her illness had relapsed twice already, making the bone marrow transplant almost too late. Insisting on surgery had been more of a psychological comfort than a real cure. Rationally, Tony Camel knew it wouldn't work, but he still prayed for a miracle with all his heart. But miracles never came. That morning, Tony Camel bought the soy milk and fried dough sticks Julia Lopez had said she wanted the night before, then went to wake her up. He knocked a few times, and heard her mumble that she hadn't slept enough and wanted to rest a bit longer. Of course, Tony Camel let her be. At that moment, Julia Lopez was curled up under the covers, small as a child. Her face was ghostly, pale so pale it was almost translucent. Anyone could tell she was in tremendous pain. Julia Lopez used the edge of the blanket to soak up the blood she coughed out, and the clearest thought in her head was how to hide the mess from Tony Camel. She had long been prepared for a relapsino. One knew her body better than herself. It seemed she was about to let all of Tony Camel's efforts go to waste. When the unbearable pain finally eased a bit, Julia Lopez instinctively reached for her neck only to find it empty. All these years, whenever she felt like she couldn't go on, she would look at the photo inside that pendant and draw strength from it. That necklace, not worth much in money, was like a lifeline that anchored her soul. Something she had treated like a treasure, never once taking it off, had long been discarded by the other person like trash. The love she once believed to be deep, as the sea had faded, aged, and devalued just like that necklace. Julia Lopez sobbed. Her persistence, her blind devotion, they were all a joke. Tony Camel sat at the breakfast table, unable to taste anything, his brows furrowed with unease. When he opened the bedroom door and saw her curled up in bed, he called softly, "Julia, your fried dough sticks are getting cold." Julia Lopez didn't respond. He pulled back the blanket hand, the sight of bright red blood burned into his eyes. He should have known something was wrong. Why pretend everything's fine? Julia Lopez, do you want to die that badly? Tony Camel growled. The pain had mostly passed. Julia Lopez looked at him with dim eyes and murmured, "I didn't want to disappoint you. I just wasn't strong enough." And so, the worst had come. Julia Lopez could only prolong her life through more chemotherapy. For a healthy person, that extension might seem fleeting. 6 months? A year? On the way back from her session, Tony Camel wore a dark expression. Julia Lopez, feeling guilty, stayed silent. How could she make it up to him? She tentatively hooked her pinky around his. Tony Camel didn't pull away. Julia Lopez smiled quietly, a faint flush blooming on her pale face. But the next moment, she withdrew her hand. How could she treat Tony Camel the same way she once treated Jason Smith? "I'm still mad. In fact, I'm even angrier," Tony Camel said sternly. "Just when I thought you were recovering, you went and pulled this." Julia Lopez almost laughed at his serious tone, but held it in, rubbing her fingers together and saying, "Sorry, let me think of a better way to make it up to you." It was an instinctive reaction from her early relationship days. At that moment, Tony Camel's inner radar kicked in, and he guessed what she was thinking. "Whatever you gave him, I want double." Julia Lopez burst into laughter, then solemnly tucked her frail hand into his warm, strong one. "Okay, I'll do my best. Let's go to the market. I really want to cook today. I'm going to make a big feast." As they passed a trash bin loaded with groceries, Julia Lopez heard a faint meowing. A yellow and white kitten lay bleeding from its back leg on top of a pile of trash. When it saw someone stop, it pitifully lifted its injured leg and cried at Julia Lopez, watery eyes pleading. "Can I keep it?" Julia Lopez couldn't take another step. Either way, she had to get the kitten to a vet. "Why not? If it makes you happy." In truth, Tony Camel was allergic to cat fur, but he loved the light that sparked in Julia Lopez's eyes like just now when he said yes. He went to a nearby shop and asked for a cardboard box and gloves, then gently placed the injured little cat inside.